The 8 surviving members of the conquered crew shuffled to the center of the deck. Shandagnet joined them, hurrying to the mast and leaning against its solid bulk and hoping his unsteady gait would be attributed to the rocking of the deck rather than to fear. Looking past the pirate chief, Shandagnet saw the Seagull, evidently reassured by the cessation of the gunfire, flat down and perched on one of the stern lanterns. It was difficult to believe that less than a half hour ago, he and Herwood's daughter had been idly tossing biscuits to the bird. "Master Herwood," called Davies. After a moment he added, "I know you weren't killed, Herwood. Where are you?" "No," came a raspy voice from behind a couple of corpses at the foot of the poop deck companion ladder. "I'm not killed." Herwood sat up, his wig gone and his elegant clothes disordered. "But I wish I had my charm against falling." "You've got Nate Careful to keep you from hurt," Davy said unsympathetically. "None of these lads did." He waved at the scattered corpses and wounded men. "I hope it was a hard fall." "My daughter's below," said Herwood, urgency coming from his voice as his head cleared. "She's guarded, but tell your men not to. They won't hurt her." The pirate chief squinted around critically. "It's not too bad a ship you brought. I guess you did pay attention to what you were told. Here, Payne, Rich, get some lads aloft and cut away all the bad wood and line and canvas, and get her jerry-rigged well enough to get us across the Grand Bahama bank." "Right, Phil," called a couple of pirates, scrambling to the shrouds. Davies climbed back down the ladder to the quarterdeck, and for several seconds he just stared at the clump of disarmed men by the mast. He was still smiling. "4 of my men were killed during approach and boarding," he remarked softly. "Jesus," whispered the man next to Shandagnet, closing his eyes. "But," Davy went on, "more than half of your own number have been slain, and I will consider that amends enough." None of the sailors spoke, but Shandagnet heard several sharp exhalations and shufflings of feet. Belatedly, he realized that his death had come very close to being decreed. "You're free to leave the ship in a boat. You're free to leave in the ship's boat," Davies continued. "Hispaniola east, Cuba north, Jamaica southwest. You'll be given food, charts, water, sextant and compass, or," he added cheerfully, "any of you that fancy it may stay and join us. It's an easier life than most at sea, and every man has a share in profits, and you're free to retire after any voyage." "No, thank you," thought Shandagnet. "Once I finish my errand in Port-au-Prince and get home again, I never want to see another damned ocean in my entire life." Old Chayworth had for several minutes been slowly looking around at the ship he had been owner of so recently, and Shandagnet realized that though the captain had reconciled himself to the loss of his cargo, he hadn't until now imagined that he would soon lose his ship too. Pirates, after all, were a shallow water species, always eluding capture by skating over the shoals and seldom venturing out of the sight of land. They should have had a little use for a deep water ship like the Carmichael, as a highwayman would have for a siege cannon. The old man was ashen, and it occurred to Shandagnet that until this development, Chayworth hadn't quite been ruined. If he hadn't lost the Carmichael herself, he could have sold her and perhaps, after paying off the stockholders or co-owners, cleared enough money to reimburse the cargo owners for their losses. The move no doubt would have left him penniless, but would at least have concealed the secret he confided to Shandagnet one drunken evening, that since the price of insurance was now higher than the greatest profit margin he could possibly try for, he had, in desperation, charged the cargo owners for insurance and then not bought any. One of the pirates who had gone below now stepped up from the after companionway and, looking back the way he'd come, gestured up with a pistol. Up to the ladder and into the sunlight climbed the cook, who had obviously followed the time-honored custom of facing seagoing disaster by getting drunk as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. and the two boys who ran all the errands on the ship, and Beth Hurwood. Hurwood's daughter was pale and walked a bit stiffly, but she was outwardly calm until she saw her disheveled father. "Papa!" she yelled, running to him. "Did they hurt you?" Without waiting for an answer, she whirled on Davies. "Your kind did enough to him last time," she said, her voice an odd mix of anger and pleading. "Beating Blackbeard cost him his arm. Whatever he's done to you people today was greatly appreciated, miss," said Davies, grinning at her. "In keeping up with the compact he and Thatch, or Blackbeard if you'd like, agreed on last year, your daddy's delivered to me this fine ship." "What are you?" began Beth, but she was interrupted by a shrill oath from Chaworth, who sprang on the nearest pirate, wrenched the saber from this prize man's hand, and then shoved him away and rushed at Davies, cocking his arm back for a cleaving stroke. "No!" yelled Shandagnet, staring forward. "Chaworth, don't!" Davies calmly hiked a pistol out of his garnished paisley sash, cocked it, and fired it into Chaworth's chest. The impact of the 50 caliber ball stopped the captain's charge and punched him over backward with such a force that he was nearly standing on his head for a moment before thumping and rattling down in absolute limpness of death. Shandagnet was dizzy and couldn't take a deep breath. Time seemed to have slowed. No, it was that each event was suddenly distinct, no longer part of a blended progression. Beth screamed. The burst of smoke from the pistol muzzle churned forward another yard. The seagull squawked in renewed alarm and flapped upward. The dropped saber spun across the deck, and the brass knuckle guard of it whacked against Shandagnet's ankle. He bent down and picked up the weapon. Then, without having consciously decided to, he was himself rushing at the pirate chief, as though his legs were pounding and his arms was keeping the heavy blade extended in front of him. In his mind, he was deftly rocking the stick and crosspiece and making the Mercutio marionette, which dangled from them, spring forward, the Tybalt marionette, in a move that his father had always called the coup en flèche. Davy, startled and amused, tossed the spent pistol to a companion and stepped back, drawing his rapier, and relaxed into the unguarded position. Taking the final stride, Shandagnet almost thought he could feel the upward yank of a marionette string as he quickly twitched his point over the other man's sword and extended it again in Davy's inside line. And he was so used to the Tybalt puppet's answering lateral parry that he was almost too quick in letting his saber drop under this real, unrehearsed one. But Davies had believed the feint and made the parry, and in the last instant, the disengaged saber was pointed at the pirate chief's unguarded flank, and Shandagnet let the momentum of his rush dive in, the yank of the hilt out of his inexpert grip, and he ran past. The saber clattered to the deck, and then for one long moment, all motion did stop. Davies, still standing, but twisted around by the thrust, was staring at Shandagnet in astonishment. And Shandagnet, empty-handed and tense with the expectation of a pistol ball at any moment from any direction, held his breath and stared helplessly into the wounded pirate's eyes. Finally, Davies carefully sheathed his sword, and just as carefully folded to his knees, and the silence was so absolute that Shandagnet actually heard the patter of blood drops hitting the deck. "Kill him," Davies said distinctly. Shandagnet had half turned toward the rail, intending to bolt it and swim the Hispaniola, when the sarcastic voice said, "For excelling you in swordsmanship, Phil? Hey, that's one way to maintain your supremacy." The statement was followed by a good deal of muttering among pirates, and Shandagnet paused hopefully. He glanced back toward Davies and prayed that the man might bleed to death before repeating the order. But Davies was looking at the pirate who'd spoken, and after a few seconds, he smiled wolfishly and pointed to his own gashed side. "Veneer, you think this will do, this cut?" Davies leaned forward, placed his hand flat on the deck, and struggling, got one rigid foot and then the other under him. He looked up at Veneer again, still grinning, and then slowly stood up from the crouch. His grin never faltered, though he went pale under his tan, and his face was slick with sweat. "You're new, Veneer," Davy said hoarsely. "You should ask Abbott, or God know how dire a wound must be to slow me down." He inhaled deeply and swayed, and stared down at the deck. His breeches shone darkly with blood down to the calf, where they were tucked into his boot. After a moment, he looked up. "Or," he went on, stepping back unsteadily and drawing his rapier again, "would you like to discover for yourself how much this has disabled me?" Veneer was short and stocky, with a ruddy, pockmarked face. Half smiling, he stared at his captain with the speculative look one gives a card game opponent whose drunkenness may have been a sham, or at least exaggerated. He spread his hands. "Damn me, Phil," he said easily. "He know I meant nothing challenging." Davy nodded and allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment. "Of course not." He thrust his sword away and turned to Shandagnet. "Veneer's right, though," he grated, "and I'm glad that nobody killed you, if only so I can learn that feint." He permitted himself to lean against the after-cabin bulkhead. "For God's blood, man," he burst out loudly. "How in the hell is it you know such a hefty move when you run like a duck and hold the sword the way a cook holds a pot handle?" Shandagnet tried and failed to think of a good lie, and he hesitantly told the man the truth. "My father ran a marionette show," he faltered, "and for the most of my life, I was a puppeteer. We performed all over Europe, and when the scripts called for sword fights, we did a lot of Shakespeare. He consulted fencing masters to make it absolutely realistic, so..." He shrugged. "I've memorized any number of fencing moves and performed each of them hundreds of times, but only with puppets." Davies, holding his side, stared at him. "Puppets," he said. "Puppets." Slowly, he let himself slide down the bulkhead and was sitting on the deck. "Where the devil's Hanson?" "Here, Phil." One of the pirates hurried over to him, opening a small clasp knife. "You're going to have to be lying down," he said. Davies obediently laid back, but propped himself on his elbows to look at Shandagnet, while Hanson, who evidently served as the pirate's surgeon, began cutting away at the blood-soaked shirt tail. "Well," Davies said, "Veneer has suggested that I was too harsh in the ordering you killed, and we... Damn your soul, Hanson, be careful!" He closed his eyes for a moment and then took a deep breath and resumed. "And we do business on the understanding that all orders are open to discussion, except when we're in serious action. Nevertheless, you did stab me, so we can't just let you leave in a boat." He looked around at his companions. "I propose we give him the choice." There were satisfied nods of agreement. Davies looked up at Shandagnet. "Join us. Wholly adopt our goals as your own, or be killed right now where you stand." Shandagnet turned to Beth Herwood, but she was whispering to her father, who didn't seem to be aware of her. Looking past the two of them, he saw a broad figure of Leo Friend, who was scowling, possibly disappointed that Shandagnet was still alive. Shandagnet had never felt more friendless and unprotected. Suddenly and terribly, he missed his father. He turned back to Davies. "I'll join you." Davies nodded thoughtfully. "That is the standard decision," he said. "I wasn't entirely sure it'd be yours."